When I was approached to write a book about Bill Clinton, I was eager to do so because I thought his presidency really resonates with us today. We learn a lot about his time, but also his time is important for our time today. A lot of the issues from the 1990s still shape our lives today. The emergence of the internet, the personal computer, the Clinton administration's economic policies, trade policies, welfare policies, and then the kind of hyper-partisanship which has put a stranglehold on politics today. Really, the origin of that is in the 1990s during the Clinton presidency. I was also, though, really wanted to try to figure out why the Clintons were such polarizing figures, because it seemed to me when they were in the White House and since that reactions to the Clintons, both pro but especially con, are out of proportion to anything that they did or said. I mean, how, for example, to explain the hatred that consumed a lot of their critics. There's no question about it. Some of their views ruffled a lot of people. Their support for abortion rights and gays in the military, gender equality, and also Bill Clinton's infidelities, certainly and understandably, upset a lot of people. But otherwise, most of their views and actions were fully within the mainstream. Bill Clinton's economic and fiscal views make him one of the most conservative Democratic presidents in the 20th century. And here, after all, was somebody who proclaimed the end of big government, who was arguably more pro-business and pro-labor, who balanced the budget, made drastic cuts in welfare. Then on other issues, was a strong anti-crime, and even to the point of supporting the death penalty. Then you had major deregulation of the banking and telecommunications. So it sort of all adds up to a very mainstream, even right of mainstream administration. And yet, for his enemies, Clinton was kind of a radical retread of the 1960s. And, it struck me that there's more going on here than just differences over policy. The Clintons were kind of a national Rorschach or inkblot test upon which people projected their hopes and fears and attitudes and values. And I would also say that their ardent admirers were no less apt to be projecting onto the Clintons. I mean, how else to explain the views of somebody like African-American writer Toni Morrison, who described Bill Clinton as the first black president and one of our own, even as she and other African-American leaders deplored Clinton's welfare policies and criminal sentencing guidelines and support for the death penalty, which was largely discriminatory in its application. So I mean, I think really when you study the Clintons, you're not just studying a presidency, but you're getting a real sort of a mirror view of American society during a pivotal time. The biggest surprise for me was the importance of foreign policy. It loomed much larger than I remembered. After a stumbling start, Clinton kind of devised a plausible alternative, a replacement for the containment policy that had guided the United States throughout the Cold War. And then, of course, he helped resolve conflicts in Bosnia and Kosovo, but also to diffuse crises in Haiti, North Korea, and between maybe the most serious of all, between India and Pakistan. More controversially, Clinton expanded the president's power over war-making power over Congress, and really anticipated some of the most controversial practices of the post 9/11 war on terror of the Bush administration, like extraordinary rendition, and moreover by constantly claiming that Saddam Hussein was harboring weapons of mass destruction. Clinton and a lot of his advisors, I think, helped lay the basis for the invasion of Iraq in 2003. And I'm not saying there's a direct line between Clinton and the invasion of Iraq, but there's unquestionably there's a connection. When we think about the Clinton presidency, we don't often think about foreign policy, but what I'm saying is we should. When Clinton was running for the presidency, historians began to see parallels between his time and the late 19th century, period that was sort of famously christened the Gilded Age by Mark Twain and Charles Dudley Warner. In both periods, Clinton's time, the 1990s and the 1890s, you had growing extremes of wealth, ethnic and a lot of ethnic and racial tensions, conspicuous consumption in the 1890s. You've got Millionaires Row in New York City and the Vanderbilt's like 70-room Breakers mansion in Newport. In the 1990s, you've got Trump Towers and McMansions in gated communities. And then in politics, you have scandals, both real and imagined in both periods. And again, partisanship that was really out of proportion to the differences between the parties. Most important of all, both periods, late 19th century, late 20th century, were transformative periods. During the late 19th century, the United States was transforming itself from an agrarian nation of towns and farms to an urban industrial giant. And the late 20th century is moving from an industrial age to an information technology-based economy. And in both cases, the changes were altering the way that people lived and worked. And it's not just historians who are noting these changes. It was Clinton himself. He was drawn again and again to the late 19th century and early 20th century because he thought that was the period in American history most like his own. And he thought that it may offer lessons on how to deal with the problems that he confronted during his presidency. For Hillary Clinton, the Clinton presidency, her husband's presidency, is both a benefit and a burden. Now, she played an unprecedented role as First Lady. No question, there have been powerful and influential First Ladies in American history. Eleanor Roosevelt, Hillary's heroine, remains the gold standard. And since that time, Betty Ford, Rosalind Carter, Nancy Reagan all had influential roles, but largely behind the scenes. No other First Lady before or really since Hillary had a role devising a major policy initiative as she did with healthcare reform. And, Hillary Care died of borning, but she acquired during the process a mastery of issues and policy that is unrivaled, I would say, this year among her competitors in either party. A year or so ago, I would have said that that her experience as First Lady, and then of course coupled with her later service as U.S. Senator and as Secretary of State, would have been a total plus. But now we're in the year of the outsider when experience doesn't seem to count very much. And so it's kind of a mixed blessing. And she's also had to, with a strong challenge from Bernie Sanders, she's had to put some distance between herself and policies of her husband's administration, like the Defense of Marriage Act and bank deregulation and the sentencing, discriminatory sentencing guidelines. So I don't think, in the short run, I don't think her White House experience is going to help her during the campaign, but should she win the presidency, I think it would be a great benefit because she's had, the next best thing you can have to on-the-job training without actually being president. Well, the biggest challenge, I think, is writing about a figure who is still active. The last book I wrote was about Franklin Roosevelt, and when I was researching that book, the Depression was over, World War II was won, and Roosevelt had long since died. So there was a beginning and an end to the story. With the Clintons, it's an ongoing saga, and so it's hard to get kind of perspective because the perspective is changing all the time. And what I tried to force myself to do was just to kind of blot out the present and immerse myself in the Clinton presidency so that I could kind of relate how history looked as it was unfolding rather than knowing how it turned out in the end. The other challenge is the opportunities, but also pitfalls. There are, I think, 64 million documents at the Clinton Presidential Library, thousands of which are online. So it makes doing research for a scholar or a student much easier than in the past. But I also found that there's a kind of a sanitized quality to the Clinton papers that I have looked at. And part of that is because the 1990s were such contentious times. Both the Clintons and their aides were very reluctant to put anything down in writing that might be taken out of context or subpoenaed or used against them. So, in fact, persons going into the Clinton administration were advised by White House counsel not to write anything down on paper or an email that they wouldn't want to see on the front page of the New York Times or Washington Post. So as a result, I think you learn less about the members of the Clinton administration, including Clinton and Hillary, Bill Clinton and Hillary, personally as people than I have found about researching Lyndon Johnson, say, or Franklin Roosevelt. And I have to say the same is true of the interviews, both that I conducted and interviews that were conducted by others that I read. Because the Clintons are still so prominent, people are a little bit guarded in their recollections. I mean, I think they're a little apprehensive about getting on the wrong side of the Clintons. I do think that because of the partisanship that exists now, that there is again sort of in the Obama administration. I'll bet somebody going through the records there will find that some of the most important exchanges were never recorded. Of course, we're also talking about the Nixon, after the Nixon presidency and the tapes. Never again will a president have any kind of a taping system. So I think all presidents have become a little bit more cautious after that. But it's too bad for history. I just think we're not going to know as much as we once did. And there's no substitute for the original record. Even recollections, interviews are fine, but the memories are fallible. And so I think we're, in a strange way, with 64 million documents at the Clinton Library, and in a way, the paradox is we might end up knowing less about the Clinton presidency than we might about other presidencies. I think probably more than any of his actions or policies, he will be remembered for his personal resiliency. Um, Throughout his life, he has been down, but never out. When he was governor of Arkansas, he suffered a devastating defeat in 1980, and everybody was saying, well, there's the end of a promising career. 1988, he delivered a disastrous nominating speech for Michael Dukakis at the Democratic Convention, and people said, well, he's finished now. 1992, when he was running for the presidency, one crisis, one scandal after another, but he was elected president. Then you get impeachment, on and on and on. The columnist Anna Quinlan once said that Clinton was like a child's inflatable toy that's sort of weighted down by sand, and you punch it and it keeps bouncing back. And I think that's Clinton, the resiliency. And I'll tell you what, it might well be Hillary Clinton's legacy as well. He's larger than life, and I've interviewed people that have met him, and it's always the same. People say when they have met him, even if it's in a crowd, it's like it is just the two of them. Clinton has an unparalleled way of connecting with people, and he's my sort of another interest I had in writing about him. He is the first person of my generation, the baby boom generation, to be president. So it's interesting to see how somebody like that would be in the White House. I mean, we have kind of the same national experiences growing up. I mean, the Cold War, the Kennedy assassination, the turbulence of the 1960s, Vietnam. So it was interesting to see what the first kind of baby boomer would be like in the White House. And that, I mean, his personality and charm were really critical to, I think, his success, to, this kind of, I feel your pain. That was critical to his success. Hillary is every bit his equal in terms of intelligence and mastery of issues, but she does not have that kind of personal touch. And but they are in many ways they are different, but also a perfect match.